physician that claims to want to solve pain is misunderstanding the problem. What you need to do is use pain to find the problem and then solve the underlying problem. You can't just keep treating pain. Pain is not the problem. Pain is the symptom, it's the indication. It's giving us information where we need to go, where we need to look.
You have chronic pain. Typically it's neurotoxic. You have to look there because even if you end up being properly diagnosed, the greater mistakes happen on the back end is how do we get rid of it?
I've had this really nagging back injury since about September of last year, and I have done almost everything I can think of for it, and I continually re-aggravate it and cause more problems. It's messing with my quality of life in a big way, for sure. I had exostomes, I think, injected into my back. For anybody who would be concerned with needles, like, this was very easy. I'm stoked for the future now.
I think when you have a chronic health issue, it's with you every day. It's always working on you if you know it or not. And I think it creates just a little bit of grief and loss in your system. Reagan eventually suggested I try stem cells in my neck. It took about 3 months, but then I did feel a very noticeable difference in the pain.
And 3 years later, you're still noticing that the benefit is there?
Absolutely.
Welcome to episode 3 of Pain Revealed. The momentum is building, the information is piling up in a good way, leading us to places to see what types of options are available to people who are struggling with acute and chronic pain. I want to thank so many of you who shared this with people that you care about. And if you haven't, or if you know additional people that you can share this with, it's not too late. Still a good time to share this information, to let people know about Pain Revealed. We had discovered so many different approaches toward dealing with acute and chronic pain that have been revolutionary for people, literally in some cases life-saving for people. So 2 things. Number 1, please do share it. And number 2, if you want to own Pain Revealed, that's available to you also. We appreciate the people who invest in it because obviously it supports our mission. So episode 3 has got a lot of really great content, high value content in it. I'm looking forward to jumping right into it with you. Again, thanks for being here, and let's get episode 3 going. The topic of stem cells and cell therapy in general is very promising and simultaneously very controversial. So this interview that I had with Dr. Ian White was very illuminating, and I'm happy to share it with you. Ian, thanks so much for sitting down. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
My pleasure, great to be here.
So let's talk about your background. Can we start there?
Sure.
What's your journey? How did you get involved in stem cells?
So it's been a 20-year journey for me. I came from the United Kingdom to the United States. After my master's degree, I was originally a parasitologist, so I studied how parasites interact with the immune system. So for me, it was very interesting to know how the body protects itself and what it does in order to fight off infection. So after my master's degree, I got a 1-year position at Dartmouth College, and I worked for a year working with C. elegans, which is a model for parasitic nematodes. And then from there, the idea was to then partner that with study of the immune system. So I got a 2-year fellowship at Harvard, working with Dr. Laurie Glimcher, who's one of the best stem cell scientists, hematopoietic stem cell scientists in the world. And from there, the idea was then to go back to England and sort of implement that to try to study how to treat parasitic infections a lot more effectively. That wasn't quite how things worked out. I ended up going to Cornell for my PhD, which was a fantastic experience. I graduated from the Ansari Stem Cell Institute. And from there, I developed a really keen interest in how the immune system works in general and where those cells of the immune system come from. And of course, they come from stem cells. Yeah. So stem cells become a bit of a fascination for me, not just hematopoietic stem cells, those stem cells of the blood, but also embryonic stem cells and stem cells from other tissues. Because as it turns out, you have stem cells in almost every tissue of your body. It's a little controversial right now, but it seems there are no stem cells in your heart, which is probably the only tissue in your body where there aren't stem cells. We probably go through about 300 million cells a minute in our body throughout our entire lifetime.
A minute?
A minute. So
wow.
Those have to be replenished, and they're replenished by stem cells. And so for me, that was really fascinating. So I spent, like I said, about the last 20 years really studying that. I went through the University of Georgia, then the University of Miami, and I published a lot of very groundbreaking work on the role of nerves specifically and how they interact with stem cells to regenerate tissue. And so I won a couple of awards. I was very lucky with the recognition that I received. But academia is very difficult. There's very little funding for academic research, so it became very difficult.
So talking about the relationship between nerves and stem cells, can you just speak to that a little bit more? Like, what was it that your work showed?
So I really tried to understand regeneration from its basics. So I had to really distill everything down, and I went back to the literature, and what I found was there were several groups focused on regeneration in lower vertebrates, so other animals less complex than us that had the ability still to regenerate tissue, like the axolotl, which is able to regrow its limbs. And what they found was that nerves are critically important for tissue regeneration. They work closely with the stem cells, and they're actually very intimately related with the vasculature. So without a vasculature, you can't get blood to tissues, you can't bring stem cells to tissues that are injured. So what they found with those studies was that without nerves, the tissue is no longer able to regenerate. And so I applied that to my work in cardiac regeneration. And so I was interested in why the human heart can't regenerate after it's injured. As you know, the liver can regenerate, and we've been aware of that for thousands of years. I'm going back to Prometheus that was able to regenerate his liver. I wondered why, if the liver and the intestine and the skin and many other tissues are able to regenerate, why is the heart not able to regenerate? And so I started to ask questions, well, how do the nerves react to injury? And it turns out that in the mammalian heart, peripheral nerves are not very good at reacting to injury. They're not very good at growing. And so the research that mine was initially based on was published in 2011 in Science by a group led by Enzo Perello. And what they discovered was that neonatal mice, so very early young mice, have this innate ability to regenerate their heart, and they're the only mammalians that can do it. Well, very early on, that is. So if you're looking very early on, you need to look at the first few days of birth, in which case if you injure the heart, the tissue regenerates. And so we can't obviously do those studies in human. So when I looked at the mouse and I recreated their experiments, I was able to regenerate the heart of the mouse. And then I asked the question, well, if we injure the heart, if we injure the heart before we injure the nerves, what happens then? So I developed a mouse model where we could see the nerves for the first time. We've not been able to see the peripheral nerves of the heart before, like directly. So this was actually on the cover of Circulation Research in 2015. I was able to see the nerves, I was able to injure the nerves, and when I injured the nerves, the heart lost the ability to regenerate.
So there's a modulation aspect, do you think, with the nerves relative to stem cells and recovery, or?
So the way that it works in the heart is very interesting. My subsequent work has focused on a lot of factors that are generated by stem cells and by nerves and how all the tissues interact. And what turns out to be really an exciting observation is that if you injure the nerves of the heart, you actually prevent the vasculature from signaling to the surrounding tissue. So there are factors that in the vasculature that respond to nerve impulses they release growth factors that then support the surrounding tissue and induce regeneration.
So these are autonomic nerves that
Exactly.
you're tracking?
Yes, that's right. The sympathetic system of the heart, if we're able to denervate those cells, if we're to kill those nerves, we lose the ability to regenerate the tissue. And I was able to take that a step further in vitro, so in the Petri dish, and say, okay, which factors from the interaction between the nerves and the blood vessels are critical for this regeneration. And I was able to recapitulate that in the Petri dish and add those factors and see regeneration and remove those factors and actually inhibit regeneration.
Wow, so it's very interesting. So if you're neural compromised, that might have an impact on how well stem cell therapy might work for you.
Without a doubt. So I think one of the new paradigms in this field is the role of nerves. So typically, most people, when they think of nerves, they think of pain. And pain is obviously a very critical component of how we function. Without pain, we wouldn't know that we were injured, and we would keep, re-injuring ourselves, and eventually, we would do something that would be fatal.
Right.
So nerves are critically important, but it turns out the nerves have much more robust roles in all aspects of biology compared to what we really thought initially. And so with those nerves, with those peripheral nerves, they're able to signal to stem cells and signal to vasculature in order to regenerate tissue.
That's fascinating. So now, because if you're talking about pain, we're now looking at the sensory nerve fibers, right? So, and as you said, a lot of people look at pain as a bad thing, but it's not pleasant necessarily. But pain is important for us to experience because it's a survival mechanism.
These symptoms that we experience that are expressed as pain are very important for our survival. In fact, evolutionarily, we wouldn't survive without pain. So pain is critical. What it tells us is there's something wrong.
Right.
And so when a patient experiences something wrong, they experience pain, they come to a physician and explain, my arm is hurting or my leg is hurting. They're able to find out, explain and communicate exactly what is wrong or where they're experiencing a problem. Then the doctor can hone in and try to treat that underlying issue.
Well, so this is really fascinating because if I'm a person who's considering stem cell therapy for maybe I'm experiencing pain in a joint, shoulder, knee, what have you, and I'm hoping to regenerate the joint so that the pain would go away. The reality is that there's this dance between the stem cells and the stuff that's modulating that pain called your nervous system.
Right. So the nerves are telling your body, hey, there's something wrong, and they're also telling your body, we can help fix it.
Yeah.
So they have this really interesting role. So when patients come to the clinic and they have pain, let's say in their knee, usually that means they have some kind of cartilage damage or maybe a tendon is injured. And so the standard of care currently is often surgery. And with surgery, you have this opioid epidemic that we're experiencing in the country right now because surgery leads to more pain, and pain is managed typically with opioids. And so recently, actually, the CDC released its new data that our average survival rate, our lifespan is decreasing further each and every year. And that's mostly because of the suicide rate going up by 4% this year due to opioids and an increase by 70,000 new people overdosing with opioids. And this is all to do with pain management going wrong. So with stem cells, we're able to actually say, okay, we have pain in this area. Stem cells are able to find that pain, find the cause of that pain, and fix the underlying issue without just masking the pain, which a lot of people, they think maybe they just want to mask the pain. They just want the pain to go away and everything will be all right. But if you solve the underlying issue, and that's what we do at IMAC Regeneration Centers, is we focus on the underlying issue and we remove that pain from the source.
Yeah, so I want to get into some detail about your actual business activities relative to stem cells, but you're speaking to something that is enormously important. So is it a part, and I think you just said it, but I want to talk about this a little bit more, is it a part of your purpose in your career to literally help solve this crisis of pain and pain management? Because as you said, the conventional wisdom is, well, pain is bad, so kill the pain or mask the pain, but that's not solving any problem. Matter of fact, it's probably going to make it worse because now you're taking away the body's sense of what's going on. So you're approaching it saying there's a way to heal so that the pain goes away as compared to just masking it. Is that accurate?
That's exactly the point. If I were to take away all your ability to sense pain right now and put you in the middle of the woods, you'd probably survive, a few hours, a few days, because you would injure yourself so much. You would have no sense of how much injury you are causing your body. So if you go to the physician with pain, your goal shouldn't be to remove that pain. Your goal should be to find out what is the cause of that pain and resolve that issue. And that's what we do at IMAC.
So how did you get involved in the business side of this? So obviously you're a researcher, you're published, right? You've got credentials from very prestigious universities. So you're an academician, you're in academia, you're getting some awards.
Yeah.
Now you crossed kind of the chasm into business. So can you walk us through that journey?
Yeah. Well, my whole life, after reading, Arrowsmith when I was younger by Sinclair Lewis, I always imagined that I'd have my own lab and maybe sitting on my desk smoking a pipe. That sort of very romantic image of being a scientist. And I pursued that for a really long time. But the focus in this country and many other countries isn't really on preventative care anymore. It's really about masking problems, because that's it's very lucrative to do it that way. Solving somebody's problem means that they go away and they live the rest of their life happily. They don't just keep coming back and getting more and more medications. So there's not a lot of emphasis on funding research that really solves the underlying problems. And so we've kind of taken it on ourselves to remove ourselves from academia and go the more private route where we can access money that can give us the opportunity to study the underlying causes and really treat those rather than just trying to figure out ways to mask the issues.
Now I find that there's this sort of acrimony between academia and the private business side of stem cells, where many in academia are feeling, well, none of this stuff is really proven or demonstrated, and things are being sold in the marketplace and under false pretenses. What do you have to say about that?
Well, there's certainly some truth to that.
Yeah.
So this is a very rapidly growing field. And unfortunately, there are people out there that take advantage of that. And there are many people that are untrained and give themselves false credentials. There are others that put a lot of money behind them and give false hope. And so that's where a lot of the animosity lies. And this is where our job becomes more complicated, but it's a very fundamental part of our job to communicate to the public, to communicate to physicians, and to communicate to lawmakers what regenerative medicine is and what it promises. We have to go back to the fundamentals. We have to explain how the body can heal itself, because we know that it can. In fact, the only reason you age is because as time goes by, you start to run out of stem cells. The pool declines, but your demand is always increasing. So if we can take stem cells and introduce those to an aging body, we can actually do a lot of good that not only perhaps slows down the symptoms of aging, because aging is really just a symptom of a disease, but we can actually help with chronic and acute injuries as well.
And this is an interesting thing as we look at these varying categories of care and lifestyle. You talked about prevention versus masking symptoms, but in this case we're talking about regenerative approaches, right? Regenerative medicine, as it were. So that's kind of its own category, right? Saying we're going to take things that have been lost and regenerate them.
Right. So there's a difference between homeostasis and regeneration. So homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain itself. So over time, it regenerates tissues that are being lost. Like I said, you're losing millions of cells every minute, and those cells have to come from somewhere. So that's homeostasis, the body just trying to keep ticking over and keep replacing tissue. Regeneration is when there's an acute injury, when something has gone wrong, and the body then has to intervene to try to fix that. And in many cases, it can't. Sometimes because the immune system is compromised or maybe even overactive. Sometimes the patient is aging. But for the most part, what we find is that regeneration is really an issue associated with blood flow. So if we can get blood to tissues, we find that we can really help a lot better. So if we have a torn meniscus, or if you have an ACL tear, or if you have issues with your spine, these tissues are typically very white. And the reason they're white is because they don't have a very good blood supply. If you have a torn muscle or an injured muscle, or if you have an injury to your skin, these tissues are very well perfused. They have a lot of blood, so they regenerate very, very easily. But the issues that a lot of people experience, where they typically go to the doctor and their main symptom would be pain, are these tissues that are white.
Right.
And so what we do is we use stem cells, and often we'll take stem cells from their adipose or from their bone marrow, or what's happening more and more frequently now is we're using allogeneic cells.
What are those?
So allogeneic cells are cells from another individual, and typically they're from umbilical cord blood.
So let's talk about the distinctions, if you don't mind. Sorry to pause you there, but I think I think it's an important part of the whole stem cell world, right? Is these, I hear debate over, what stem cells are best or what are the best sources. So can you just talk about each one a little bit?
Sure. So if we're talking about a 25-year-old athlete who has a torn ACL, we're more likely to take their bone marrow or their adipose because these stem cells are very robust. But if we're talking about a 60 or 70-year-old individual, their stem cell pool is already declining. Their cells have become senescent, and so they don't really respond very well to injury. So in that case, what we might do is take this allogeneic approach where we take stem cells from the umbilical cord blood, which is a pool very potent in stem cells and regenerative cells, and we're able to introduce that into the injury and boost repair. So these cells don't actually integrate, but they actually activate the regenerative response in the patient themselves.
So I've heard some people say that cord blood doesn't really have a lot of stem. They don't call it stem cell therapy. They say there are regenerative cells in there, but it's not really the stem cells that are facilitating that. Is that accurate, or
So this is semantics.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I think a lot of people in this field go to some weekend seminars and they're doing their diligence, they're trying to learn, but there's only so much you can learn in a couple of days at a seminar. I've been studying stem cells for 20 years and I'm still learning a lot. But stem cell therapy is really just become a term that's used more generically than it should be. So in fact, what we're really doing are cellular therapies, or these are cellular therapeutics that do include stem cells, but stem cells aren't the entire story. There's more to the story than just the stem cells. And in fact, for the most part, most of the stem cells that people refer to are called mesenchymal stem cells. And in fact, these aren't true stem cells either. These are more like medicinal signaling cells. These are cells that have the ability to help regenerate, but they're not actually stem cells.
And that's true of the cord cells that you're talking about.
So with the cord, there's typically between 1 and 3% mesenchymal stem cells in that mononuclear fraction. But then there's also a lot of hematopoietic progenitors and leukocytes and a lot of other cells that actively contribute to the regenerative process. So it's a bit of a misnomer when somebody says, well, this product has 100% stem cells versus this product that only has 1 to 3% stem cells, because first of all, they're misclassifying the cells. These aren't true stem cells anyway. But second of all, they're not understanding the true biology of the regenerative process, because there's a lot more to it than just these, what we've been recently calling stem cells. There are a lot of other cells that actually contribute.
And I guess in reality, stem cells don't live in isolation in the body. There are these other types of cells around them that I guess synergize to create an effect.
Right, so I've got a perfect example of that. So as I mentioned, the heart is probably the only tissue in the body that doesn't have its own pool of stem cells into adulthood.
Right.
And there's been a lot of controversy around that recently, but the evidence that's coming out is pretty conclusive that the heart does not have a pool of stem cells. And in fact, it typically turns over about 1% of the cells per year for your lifetime. So for your whole lifetime, you're only really going to turn over about 50% or so of your cells. So then how does the cell maintain itself and how does it respond to injury? Well, unfortunately, our heart as a human being has evolved to actually avoid regeneration. And that sounds strange, but if you think about it, we're quite large.
Right.
And the pressure inside our ventricle is about 180 millimeters of mercury.
Right.
So if we had a heart attack and we had an injury to that ventricle, and all of the cells tried to divide and regenerate, we would have a blowout and we would die, and theoretically we wouldn't make it to reproductive age.
Right.
So evolutionarily, we've developed a way to block that hole, to plug that hole with collagen. Now, if we want to study regeneration of the heart, we have to look much earlier, and we look at the neonatal mouse. And what we find there is that the epicardium, this very thin layer of cells around the heart, is actually crucial for regeneration. And these cells are activated by the nerves of the heart, and they proliferate, they start dividing, and they become thick, and then they migrate to the injury site. So a lot of my research that is about to be published soon, hopefully, demonstrates that in the case of heart regeneration, the nerves signal to the epicardium, which is a non-stem cell population of cells. These cells then migrate into the injury site. They set up this regenerative environment that then pull mature cardiomyocytes into that area to repair the injury.
Yeah, it's very interesting because my background as a chiropractor, and I helped develop technologies including heart rate variability and other things where we're looking at measuring autonomic function, sensory function, et cetera, and looking at the implications of improving neural performance in the realms of the nervous system, sensory, autonomic, and motor,
Yep.
and then seeing how that might affect general health and well-being. So now we're starting to see that this ties into stem cells and the utilization of the body of stem cells, and how the nervous system really kind of is this master system of the body that has to be understood in order for the rest of it to be understood.
That's absolutely accurate. And I think that there are perhaps more people in the field starting to sign on to that hypothesis. I think it's still very new, but I firmly believe that nerves are the central driving force behind regeneration. And without nerves, we don't get tissue regeneration. And I can give you a very good example of that.
Please.
Peripheral neuropathy, when we're looking at diabetes. So when the nerves start dying because of diabetes, you start losing toes and fingers, and you start having cardiomyopathy because the nerves of the heart are dying back. And so all of these issues are related to the loss of nerves initially, which then results in the loss of vasculature. And without the vasculature, you get necrosis and tissue death. So this is a very real-world example of how nerves are critical for maintaining tissue and for regenerating tissue.
Well, it's exciting. You're the first person that I've spoken to, and I've spoken to many, stem cell experts and other people who have experience with it. But you're the first person really to bring that dimension to bear on this subject and understanding the critical importance of it. So now, how do you turn that into a clinical protocol? that you guys do at your centers. Can you describe, what you guys do?
So the clinicians, obviously, at the clinics, take the lead when it comes to actually implementing the medical treatments. But from my perspective, I'm still very interested in developing the biology behind everything and understanding the biology, because by understanding the biology, we can create more effective therapeutics. And so my most recent research has been focused on understanding the molecular signaling between the nerves, the vasculature, and the surrounding tissue, to understand that whole system, and then try to figure out what we can pull out of that and use that therapeutically. So for an example, one of the things that I was hoping to develop before I left academia, and maybe it's something in the pipeline for future, is developing like an EpiPen-like device that's full of growth factors that support nerve survival. So that if you're high risk for a heart attack, or maybe in an ambulance, they carry these devices, and then when you have a heart attack, or if they find a patient that's having an acute myocardial infarction, they're able to inject the patient with this device, which then releases these growth factors that support nerve survival. When you can support nerve survival, you can induce tissue regeneration, and you can actually reduce tissue loss. So as far as applying the stem cells in the clinic, they're taking generic stem cells right now and using those, and in the background, what I'm trying to do is understand the biology to really enhance and improve that technology.
So we look at the journey of stem cell therapy from getting the source to getting it into a human being. What are the milestones along that experience?
So we're really one of the only, if not the only, clinic in the United States that is a one-stop shop, if that's a good term. We source the cells, we manufacture the product, and then we apply the product to patient therapy. So the way that works is that we work with FDA-registered cord bank collectors to receive donated blood. So cords are typically considered medical waste, and a mother can give her approval to have that cord donated for therapy or for research. And so we're able to work with those companies to harvest that blood. I then receive it within 24 hours of birth. And then there's a process that's using a few FDA-approved devices that we're able to isolate the mononuclear fraction very, very quickly from that blood. And then we cryopreserve it with some IP that we've developed over the years. And that's very key, because a lot of people that are using these products don't freeze or thaw the product or the cells very well, and they end up getting a lot of death. And so there's a lot of controversy in the field whether or not they're live cells and whether these are functional cells and whether they can do anything. But if you handle them correctly, they're very, very effective at regenerative medicine. So my goal is to harvest those cells the best way I can, is to freeze them so that they are viable, and then I supply them to the clinics, whether it's our clinics at IMAC or other third-party clinics. It's then the physician's job to handle those correctly, and many physicians aren't really trained how to handle those cells post-thaw correctly. But then they treat the patients, and depending on the indication, they may have to inject in a knee or other joint, or maybe they have to go IV or some other route in order to get the cells where they need, maybe even topically. There are diabetic lesions that are refractory to other treatments, and in fact, if you just rub the stem cells on a lot of these lesions, they resolve.
So in your mind, based on your experience, what do you think some of the conditions are that respond fairly routinely or favorably to stem cell therapy as you're describing it, I might say regenerative cell therapy to be a little bit more accurate, as compared to some things that maybe people are searching for stem cell solutions to that don't seem to respond very well?
So what we find is that most indications do respond to some degree. Now, every patient is different, and this is one of the reasons it's so hard to collect data, because without huge data sets, it's really hard to get an idea of what's happening. But on an individual basis, we typically see that each patient that comes by responds in some way, whether it's a few percent or completely. In some cases, we have remarkable recovery rates. And the best sort of indications typically are orthopedic indications. So if we have somebody that's bone on bone with their knees, they can come in and get stem cell therapy, and we're actually able to visually see the cartilage growing back. We're able to take MRIs and see over time how that cartilage regrows. And then at IMAC, we rehabilitate the tissue and the surrounding joint so that they're able to walk again. So most clinics would perhaps inject the cell therapy, and that would be the end. But we actually take care of the knee itself and rehabilitate the whole tissue after the stem cells are able to initiate that regenerative response.
With IMAC, are you also doing adipose or bone marrow, or are you just doing the cord blood?
So we've been using FDA-approved devices in order to harvest adipose. We don't so much do bone marrow, but we have been using adipose for knees and for cartilage regeneration. But we're really trying to move into the allogeneic area because it's an off-the-shelf option. It doesn't require any additional intervention with the patient. We don't have to go in and harvest the cells.
It's certainly a lot more pleasant for the patient, right?
Much easier. It's much quicker, and so we're able to take that product off the shelf, and we're able to use that and get very good results.
So you're looking at now pain, and as we described earlier, it's not like, hey, this is a pain therapy. Pain happens to go away when you regenerate a joint.
Right.
It's
I'm
different
not
than saying
in the
we're
business
treating
of
pain.
I'm not in the business of treating pain. I have no interest in treating pain, and any physician that claims to want to solve pain is misunderstanding the problem. What you need to do is use pain to find the problem and then solve the underlying problem. You can't just keep treating pain. Pain is not the problem. Pain is the symptom. It's the indication. It's giving us information where we need to go and where we need to look.
So we talked about knees, shoulders. Where else do you apply stem cell therapy?
So we've had patients that have had stroke, and stroke is very responsive, actually. We have a lot of patients where they have spastic muscle, and so we had a patient that was 4 years in a wheelchair, completely paralyzed on the left side, and he came in for stem cells, and 20 minutes later, he told his wife he had the urge to move his foot. And so we had on camera him twitching his foot just 20 minutes afterwards. Wow. We also then had on camera 1 day later where he's able to move his whole foot and a little bit of his leg. Another 48 hours later, he's able to lift his leg up, and now we're rehabilitating him, and now he's on his feet and he's walking. So these are the sorts of things.
He's on his feet walking at this point, so that's fairly dramatic.
Very quickly, yeah.
And how are you administering for him?
So there are various sort of ways that the physicians in the office administer the cells, and it's really sort of up to them to sort of make that decision and that call. So I'm not really involved with that portion of it.
So, but is it more systemic? Like, it's one thing to say we're going directly into a joint, but this is more just sort of systemic, and the body utilizes it?
Right. So you have to get to the nerves, and you have to get to the blood vessels, and so obviously In a joint, it's very encapsulated, it's very local. So we have to go a little bit more systemically in order to get those stem cells or exosomes, perhaps, in the right place to see that sort of effect.
You just used the word exosomes. What are exosomes?
So exosomes are sort of like the next paradigm shift in this whole area. We've known about exosomes for a very long time. They're essentially little vesicles that the cells use to signal. So we've known for a long time that stem cells signal or work in a paracrine fashion. They work by signaling other cells. And the way they do that is they package materials, RNAs and proteins, in these little bubbles of lipid and then send those out on a regular basis. And those float around the body or wherever they happen to be. And then they bind with other cells and release those goodies. And what's happened recently is that we found that we can actually harvest and concentrate those and use those therapeutically. So where we're working closely with the FDA with the cells, the FDA has a very strong penchant for acellular products. And so exosomes are a new line of therapeutics that are acellular. They don't have a nucleus, they don't have DNA, but they're very therapeutically potent.
So you wouldn't call that stem cell therapy necessarily, but I guess it has a similar context as far as how you harvest and want to deliver them?
So again, stem cell therapy is all a misnomer. There is no stem cell therapy.
Okay.
We're not in the business of stem cell therapy. In fact, there is no stem cell therapy. There are no therapeutics that are stem cell exclusively based. If we're talking about embryonic stem cells, there are clinics that are illegally using embryonic stem cells in a very dangerous way and infusing patients and risking teratoma formation and a lot of very negative potential consequences. What we're talking about are mononuclear cells. So they're not all stem cells. Stem cells are a very specific cell type. Some might still think of mesenchymal stem cells as stem cells because they have this tri-lineage potential. They can differentiate into a few different tissues. But when we're really talking about stem cells, it's kind of something else. So we use stem cell therapy as a term, but really what we're talking about is cellular therapy. We're talking about cellular therapy. And so exosomes are not cellular therapy, they're an acellular therapy. So they're a regenerative acellular therapy.
Any potential downsides to any of this as far as can any of it be harmful?
So there are indications that we typically try to avoid when we introduce cellular therapeutics. The issue is that these cells are very potent in growth factors, and one of the things we don't want to do is to encourage the growth of tumors.
Right.
So we stay away from leukemia and solid tumors. There's not a lot of evidence to suggest whether actually stem cells are effective in reducing tumors or whether they actually lead to the growth of tumors. So until that data's in, that's one of the areas we try to avoid.
So with the futures you see unfolding in the next 5 to 10 years in this area of cellular therapy, what do you see happening?
Well, one of the responsibilities that I have as a stem cell scientist, and I'm going to call myself a stem cell scientist just for ease, is to really work closely with the FDA and other oversight committees in order to educate them in the process and in the mechanisms of regenerative medicine so that we have this avenue to bring products to the patients that we don't currently have. So we're setting up an academy that we hope to have our own IRB, which is a way to vet other scientists and give our we were able to peer review. We're able to review the science that they're trying to attempt, and then we present that to the FDA and say, we as scientists agree this is a very good way to proceed, or not. But we need to govern ourselves, but we also need to work very closely with the FDA. So I've taken it on myself to work very closely with them and to work with my peers to do our due diligence, to be very careful, to be very rigorous, and to work very closely together. There are a lot of cowboys out there. There are a lot of people that are really making the field look bad because the public really just hear of all the negative things that are happening in the news,
Right.
people going blind or other issues. But these are people that are misusing the technology, that don't understand the technology, that haven't been trained in the technology. So those of us that are trained, we need to try to speak out more. We need to be more vocal and help educate, like I said, not only the public, not only the physicians, but also the lawmakers as well.
You're bringing up an important point from the consumer side, and that is, this is a fairly large investment, for most people. It's in the thousands of dollars. They're trying to solve a problem that they have. the FDA is now trying to take a role in this. I think they're forming more and more policy, I think, as we speak right now, which is, I think, probably great that you are interacting with the FDA to try to get some proper structure around this. But now let's say I'm a guy saying, I've got this knee problem, and I've been taking painkillers, and I'm told that I'm stuck with it because I'm bone on bone, I'm degenerated, et cetera. And then I'm given this hope of this quote unquote stem cell therapy that I could do, but it's like $7,000.
Yeah.
And then I go online to start reading about it, and I start seeing all this craziness. It's like the wild, wild west. How do I get context? So what advice do you give consumers who are searching, saying, how do I decide if this is right for me?
Yeah, it's very difficult. So one of the things that I do in the very little spare time that I have is that I try to get on Facebook and other social media outlets, and I try to interact with the public, and I try to give them answers to their questions because they're hungry for answers. They have a lot of questions, and it's very, very hard for them to get legitimate and accurate information. So all I could recommend for people to do is try to find advocacy groups. There are some on Facebook and others where it's mostly patient-led. So a lot of patients that have been through the process, they talk to each other and they're able to advise each other. If you wanted to go to a particular clinic, you could say, hey, thinking about going here, and people could say, I've had very good experiences there, or others might say, I've had very bad experiences there. So that's one place to start. Others, like for example, with iMac, we decided to go public because we wanted to have a more open face and bring ourselves more in line with patients that are looking for this kind of therapy and just don't know where to start. So by going public, we have more of a public face. We have more access to patients so that we can share information, because that's what we're all about. We're all about trying to share information, educating the patient before anything else is done, and making sure they make the right choice.
How long has iMac existed?
So the first iMac clinic was in Paducah, and that was 18 years ago. And so only over in the last 2 years have we really opened a lot more clinics, and so we're expanding now quite rapidly, and we've opened up this manufacturing arm of iMac as well, where I've been brought in as the Chief Scientific Officer in order to develop more therapeutic products, in order to not only treat our patients and try to really push the field forward, but make that technology available to other physicians that really want a good quality product and know where it's coming from, who's made it, and how it's been made.
What does iMac stand for?
So iMac stands for Integrative Medicine and Chiropractic. That's probably an acronym that will be changing in the future, because we're moving more from the chiropractic side to the regenerative side. So in the future, whereas the original clinic was all about chiropractic and rehabilitation, now we're going to be focused on bringing both arms together, regenerating the tissue, and then rehabilitating that whole joint in order to get the best possible effects.
So your activities pretty much day-to-day now are mostly what?
So a lot of my time, like I said, I'm on social media talking with patients that just have general questions about stem cells. I've been traveling a lot to conferences, so I have one of my favorite presentations that I'm currently giving, which I call Regeneration 101, where I talk to physicians about what regeneration really is. But they don't know the basics. And so they learn about stem cells, and they learn about cellular therapeutics, and they learn about aging and pain, but they don't know the regenerative process, because this is all brand new. This is all a very dynamic area. And so what I want to do, and what I've been doing lately, is bringing a more fundamental basis to their knowledge pools. So I've been talking to them about how nerves and vasculature interact, and what's the difference between regeneration and homeostasis. Just trying to get them a strong foundation so that when they start listening to the presentations about various therapies or indications on how to treat them, that they understand some of the biology behind it, so that hopefully then they can make better decisions about how to apply that technology.
There's some deep, I think, medical ethical questions around this, insofar as you got an FDA who is charged with supposedly protecting the public and validating things before they could be offered and regulating that area. At the same time, you have people who say, "Hey, it's my body. I want to give it a shot. I'm struggling or suffering here, and this might hold some promise to me." And there's the people out there who are trying to make representations. How does this all get into balance where we could say, you know what, we're in a good place as far as this therapeutic intervention and meeting the needs of the public and it being honest in its approach?
So I think this is probably the most important question in this entire field right now, because I agree that if we have a medicinal product in our bodies, we should be able to access it. There shouldn't be any kind of oversight telling us that we can't access that when we don't want to try, contemporary medicines that aren't working. So I completely sympathize with that, and I understand that. Here's where the FDA come in, though. There are so many people out there that take advantage, right? So you need an oversight. You need somebody to put the brakes on, because otherwise everything would get out of control. So a lot of those in the field criticize the FDA for restricting access, but what they don't understand is if the FDA weren't there, we would likely be doing more harm. And by we, I mean the field, because there would be so many people that have no idea what they're doing, promising things that they can't deliver, and then nobody would win, because patients would end up getting hurt, the industry would look terrible in the public eye. So without oversight, it's just chaos. Yeah. It's going to be complete chaos. So where others in the field, they will actively push against the FDA. I think that's a mistake. I choose to work closely with the FDA and try to help educate them. Though a lot of those guys aren't actively at the bench. They're not studying this stuff. They're not up to date with a lot of the new things that are happening at the bench today. They may be familiar with what's being published, but often that's 2 or 3 years old.
Right.
And so it's our job, if we're going to do this right, to work with the FDA and say, we all want the same thing. We just want people to get better. So what we need to do is we need to police this in a really constructive way, but we have to still be realistic. We have to say there are clear advances here, and we need to focus on those. We need to push things forward. We need to allow people to take advantage of the technologies that we're demonstrating efficacy on. But at the same time, we have to police the cowboys that are coming in and trying to take advantage with no or little training.
Do you have any personal experience with stem cell therapy? I mean, as a patient?
Yeah, so I've been pretty lucky that I'm, relatively healthy, but, working late nights and, I work a lot, so you start to feel fatigued. I've often experienced brain fog, tingling in my fingers from potential nerve damage. So I have actually tried it myself. I've infused stem cells, so I make a product called Neocyte, which is an umbilical cord derived cellular product, and I've also infused exosomes. And what I found is that my brain fog cleared up, my tingling went away. I feel that I can focus a lot better. I think generally I just feel healthier. And obviously that's not the be-all and end-all. We're trying to encourage a lot of IV therapeutics in conjunction with stem cells. So we have to balance the body. We have to introduce B6 and B12 and vitamin C and glutathione. And I strongly recommend our patients take LNAC, which is a product that's available. You don't have to buy it through a pharmaceutical company. You can buy it from Amazon. But it helps support nerve integrity. And so if you're a potential cardiac patient, or if you have tingling in your extremities, you've got nerve problems. So things like LNAC and glutathione can help reduce the oxidative stress in your body and maintain those nerves, which, as we now know, helps regenerate the body. So I've been actively focused on trying to keep a healthy lifestyle and supplementing with these therapeutics. Mainly initially to see if I really see the effects that the patients report, and I do. And so I can say from firsthand experience that I feel different after stem cells. I'm lucky enough not to have any major issues where I need long-term cellular therapy, but I'm very happy with how I feel after the exosomes and the stem cells.
That's terrific. Well, listen, this was very informative, and I appreciate you sharing your experience, your wisdom with us, and your personal story. So thank you very much.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, and thanks for doing this, because it's really important that we keep communicating. There are so many people out there that are miscommunicating, are misdirecting, giving false information, or just inaccurate information. So I think things like this are really the only way that we as legitimate scientists can talk to the public and can talk to the lawmakers and say, look, this is working. Work with us to do this the right way. So I really thank you for doing that.
Terrific. Thanks, Ian.
All right, pleasure.
Ian White is a very bright guy with a lot of contemporary information. I really enjoyed that interview, and I hope you got a lot out of it too. I've known Dr. Dan Pompa for a long time, and he continues to impress me with his knowledge and understanding. One of the things that causes chronic pain, and does so in a sort of stealth way, is mold and neurotoxins and other such factors. Not many people are talking about this, so my conversation with Dr. Dan Pompa was very, very revealing. So I'm excited to share this with you right now. Dr. Dan Pompa, thanks for sitting with me.
Yeah, glad to be here always.
Yeah, so let's talk about your background. What's your educational background and what are your business activities today?
Yeah, my educational background. Well, I started elementary school. No, I mean, I always say that, look, my authority doesn't lie in my education. My authority actually lies in my story, from pain to purpose. But yeah, I mean, I started as a chiropractor, still am, right? I mean, rooted in the philosophy of chiropractic, which really led me to here because I got very ill. And through that illness, utilizing the philosophy that the body has an innate ability to heal itself, led me to everything that I teach today.
Well, perfect. If the theme is from pain to purpose, we're here to talk about pain.
Yeah.
So what is your view of pain, maybe philosophically speaking, to start out? And then how do you think maybe the world's got it wrong as far as the way they view pain and how maybe a traditional medicine might approach it?
Yeah. You and I always like to start with philosophy because, therein lies the answer, doesn't it, right? So my view of pain is, I'll make it simple. It's an alarm, something telling the body that something's wrong. Maybe most people watching this heard the analogy, right? It's if the oil light comes on in the car, I don't think anybody would think to just cut the wire or put tape over it, but yet that's how pain's being treated. I think there's a time and a place to cover up pain, right? I mean, obviously it could be more stressful to the body than taking a medication to cover the pain. However, if you're looking at that as a long-term solution, therein lies a big problem with how we're treating pain. Pain is no doubt an indicator that there's something wrong. Why don't we look under the hood? And that's something that I see even missing in the alternative treatment today. It's kind of, the philosophy has covering pain just kind of made its way into alternative medicine where we're using more natural things, which is better, obviously less side effects. However, if you're not looking upstream to figure out the causative factor, then there's a problem.
Now, you actually characterize some maybe unusual causative factors in pain where people are experiencing certain types of pain and they may think that what's causing it is something other than maybe what the root cause is. So, and some of that's environmental, maybe in nature. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I see it all the time because I deal with very, very sick and challenged people, and I also teach doctors around the country. And one of the things I always remind even the doctors that I train is if somebody's not getting well, and oftentimes, most often, pain is part of that picture. Fatigue, brain fog, I mean, there's a list of symptoms. If somebody's not getting well as expected, there's something still upstream, and you haven't found it yet. And that means that your best efforts, the perfect diet, everything that you think would typically work, it may relieve some things, but they're still not getting well. There's something still hidden, and you haven't found it yet.
So what types of things could be hidden and how will they express symptomatically, especially with pain?
Look, there's a lot, but we'll narrow it down to three big ones that I see missed all the time. So these would be what I would call the hidden causes of pain that if unleft or unchecked or not found will continue to cause the symptoms despite your best efforts. Number one, biotoxic illness, typically in mold. Oftentimes, people are living in a moldy home or being exposed at work, a school, something. Mold produces a biotoxin, meaning a neurotoxin that attacks your nerve system. So we're not talking about a mold allergy. We're talking about a toxin that affects your neurological system, your brain, etc., that will drive pain. And most people are unknowingly being exposed to mold, meaning that you don't see it growing, you don't know you have it, but it is a hidden source. And we'll just go through them and then we can expand. Hidden infections. 95% of the time it's in your mouth. So root canals, something called a cavitation, which is like a cavity in your jaw. And it typically happens from where teeth were extracted. It heals over, but the infection is underlying.
So you're saying that's a byproduct of a root canal?
It is.
Okay.
Matter of fact, it is a byproduct of a root canal, but it also is a byproduct of wisdom teeth being removed. But typically, the symptoms don't manifest for 20 to 25 years. The infection forms in that time. And now all of a sudden, you find yourself in chronic pain, fatigue, and all the typical symptoms, and you don't know why. They go from medication to alternative things, and yet most people don't look at where a tooth was extracted.
I say because they're saying, well, there's no tooth there, so how can it be hurting, right?
That's right. And matter of fact, here's the problem. It doesn't hurt. The body may hurt, meaning it may be manifesting in pain throughout the body, chronic pain.
Oh, so you're saying it becomes systemic in nature, the pain.
That's the problem.
Is that true of mold, too?
So I'm not talking about pain here. I'm talking about, it's the same with mold. Mold, one of the first things that we look at if someone has mold illness is chronic pain that just doesn't subside, despite all the best treatments.
And is that pain like achy in joints or?
Achy in joints. With mold in particular, morning stiffness. Literally, you wake up and you start the day in pain, and it may take you 5 to 30 minutes, and then once you get going, you feel a little better, but you still suffer from chronic pain. But that morning stiffness is classic mold toxicity.
Now, this is really interesting because a lot of times people might start to think, especially if it's 20 years after a wisdom tooth extraction or what have you, is that maybe I'm just getting older.
That's right.
And they start to accept the pain as a part of their aging process when literally it's not, and it means that there's other things going on in their body that's not good, right?
Absolutely, and look, it's complicated because these infections, hidden infections, can drive autoimmune. So that means that it's putting your body in a chronic inflammatory state, right, which is driving a lot of the pain. So when your body starts attacking itself, and really that's what's happening, is your own immune system starts attacking its joint surfaces. So if it's attacking the collagen in your joints, we tend to call that rheumatoid arthritis. If it's attacking your skin, we could call it scleroderma, we could call it lupus. But the bottom line is we call autoimmune the disease depending on what it's attacking. The bottom line is that it's typically driven by some type of hidden neurotoxic source, and we're talking about 3 of them here. And the other one I didn't mention is heavy metals, which we can get to. But on the topic of cavitations, 85%, if you have a wisdom tooth removed, 85% of them end up in one of these cavitations. I mean, that's a big number.
Okay.
And again, because there's no pain associated with it, you don't know. Now, I have to say this, because years ago, the only way, and it wasn't even understood years ago, they called them NECOs, which is basically a deep-rooted infection that affects the nerve. But the only way of finding it is because you can't see them on a plain x-ray. That's the big problem. So what we'd do is we'd go in, I say we, dentists would go in and drill into the space where the tooth was taken out. And if you can picture drilling into drywall, if you hit a stud, it feels solid, right? But if you miss the stud, it kind of falls in.
Right.
Well, that's what they would look for. That was the only way to determine if you had a cavitation. Basically go in and see if there was infection.
Wow.
Right? So it wasn't very accepted in the dental world. Now, we have something new. It's called a cone beam. I'll spell it because it kind of runs off. CONEBEAM, cone beam. It's a 3D x-ray. It's more like a CAT scan that we're able now to see deeper into the jaw differently at 3D. And now we're able to identify these things. So now cavitation has been much more accepted because now we actually can see, wow, these things actually do exist. And it's shocking how often they're causing problems.
So if somebody is, let's say, getting up achy, stiff in the morning, because you already said, for the cavitation, cone beam, if you could find that service somewhere, get that done. That can tell you if that's a root cause for what you might be experiencing. But if somebody's getting up achy in the morning because of biotoxins in the environment, mold or some other types of things, And what's the typical routine for them? Is they say, hey, I'm achy, I feel sore. They're going to Costco and buying a big bucket of Advil or something, right? So how does that path lead? Now they're masking sort of the stiffness and pain that's coming from this environmental factor. It's not really aging. Where does that lead?
Well, look, you have to remove the sources first and foremost. And I can tell many stories. I'll tell one that just recently happened. The gentleman was literally in the chair, and he said it felt like a spiritual experience. And by the way, another woman told me the same thing. That one was probably about 3 months ago. She said it just felt like she was reconnecting with her body. What was happening was the surgery was being done, clearing the infection from her jaw. And the other gentleman, he literally texted me, leaving the dentist, and you have to go to a dentist, and we should talk about that knows how to do this correctly. Leaving the dentist saying, and I knew that he had this liver pain, it was 20 plus years, and pain all throughout his body. He was leaving, and he said, that liver pain is gone, and it is yet to return. And he said, 85% of the pain in my body is gone. He just left the dental chair.
Wow.
So, I mean, now, again, sometimes it takes longer than that, and we put people on a post protocol, to help the body clear the infection. But these are cases that literally just got the infection out. And probably what happened is the body stopped attacking and driving the inflammation that was happening from the autoimmune. But the bottom line is when you remove the source, the body can heal itself.
Right, but my question is on the other side of that. Supposing they don't remove the source and they keep taking the drugs,
okay,
now that's going to lead to other health issues, toxicities, et cetera.
Yes.
And then maybe amplify other types of pain syndromes.
Well, it's like any drug. People that are on pain, the drug that worked, first Tylenol works, and then it doesn't. Then it's more Tylenol. Then it's codeine. Then it's the next one, and you need more and more of it, right? So obviously, you're building a tolerance, and it's basically building up a toxicity. Just like any drug addict, now you have to detox literally from the pain medication. So that's a no-win situation there.
So if I'm someone who's lived in chronic pain right now, watching this, and I'm saying, oh wow, I have been taking a lot of those what they call NSAIDs, or these over-the-counter drugs, and now I'm looking to find the root problem and really solve the problem rather than just mask the pain. Should I be thinking about detoxing my body due to any prescription meds or these other drugs?
I mean, detox is obviously part of this picture, right? Because I'm talking about 3 hidden toxins that affect your body, and they build up in your body. So pain medications, they affect the liver. I think everybody knows that, but to the degree people don't know, they affect the gut. These are the 2 most important downstream detox pathways. What most people don't know is what they do at the cell. Every cell in your body has an innate ability to detox itself. When it makes its own energy, so you feel good, it makes toxins. And a good, healthy cell gets rid of them. But unfortunately, a toxic cell doesn't, and now it's building up even more toxins. So you have to get the cell working, and you have to get the downstream pathways working. In people taking pain medication, you're affecting the cell, the liver, the gut, just to start.
Yeah, and then to get this detox done, it's something that no matter what your particular cause of pain is, if you've been on medication especially for any period of time, detoxing your liver is probably a good thing to be researching.
Yeah, and look, I have a saying, you have to fix the cell to get well, but you have to actually detox the cell to get well. So you can't just do, most of the detoxes on the market, I call them poopers, meaning that they just kind of make you go. And that's good. I'm not even against it. However, that's not going to get you well from biotoxic illness. Right. It's not going to get you well from heavy metal illness. You have to detox the cell. And then we keep the liver open. Yes. So then things like coffee enemas and things that we utilize to help the liver flow and the gut, those are important. But you do have to make your way to the cell.
So when it comes to the third part, you talk about heavy metal toxicity. How does somebody become toxic from heavy metals, and what kind of pain will that cause?
Well, again, I think it's a lot of hidden sources, similar to mold, similar to the cavitations, the hidden infections. When you're looking at heavy metals, flu shots still have mercury in them. It's an ethyl mercury that actually crosses the blood-brain barrier easier than any type of mercury. And there it turns to inorganic mercury where it's locked in forever. Silver fillings, which is what got me sick. They have 50% mercury. And they leach mercury, the life of the filling. The vapor comes off of the filling, especially when you chew hot liquids, and turns to inorganic mercury in the brain. And again, there it's locked unless you do the proper detox to remove it. So obviously we've heard a lot about mercury in the environment and fish. And yes, and it's higher levels today than ever. I just recently saw something. They were testing fish up in the waters up near Seattle. And the levels of toxins, mercury, pesticides was incredible. It was in every fish that they tested, extremely high in salmon. So the bottom line is we're all exposed. The problem is if you overwhelm the system. So every one of us have a bucket. This is an easy analogy to understand. Genetically, some people have bigger buckets than others. But when that bucket fills up and starts overflowing, that's when the symptoms start, right? And most people start with medications, I would say. And when that doesn't work and they're getting worse, then maybe they move to alternative sources. But ultimately, how do you get well? I mean, unless you're trying to empty the bucket, your pain's never going to go away, right? You have to empty the bucket. And I look at it this way. We have 70 trillion cells in our bodies. Those are 70 trillion little buckets that need emptied. And that's where my cellular detox work, what I'm known for, is that's where it comes in. You have to upregulate cell function. That's real detox. We want to keep our bowels moving. We want the liver to work. That's part of my system. But ultimately, where people really don't get it is you have to get the cell doing what it needs to be doing every day, and that's detoxing. That's real detox.
So kind of just summarizing this context, if somebody is dealing with what would probably for the most part be chronic pain, and they're saying, well, wait a minute, I never injured myself exercising, or I can't point to something that is a cause of this pain, especially when it seems sort of like systemic. It's not like, just my elbow hurts, although maybe it could be. But it seems like I'm having these kind of vague pains, discomforts. It seems chronic. It doesn't go away. It's getting tougher to get up in the morning and get my motor running.
Yes.
You're saying that there's these three areas that you want to look at as potential situations that are causing that pain that are probably unnoticed or would not be detected if you went to most traditional practitioners for an evaluation.
Absolutely. Look, I think most people watching this have heard inflammation is the cause of most diseases, right? But somehow where inflammation started, my shoulder hurts, that is inflammation, right? But, we've kind of lost the premise that inflammation is still why you have chronic pain as well. But systemic inflammation, meaning systemic throughout your body, that's the driver of causing your chronic pain. But then we have to back up and say, okay, what's driving that chronic inflammation, right? It's not the injury. Typically, where you have been injured is where you feel it the most. Past injuries. I injured my knee 20 years ago. If you have chronic inflammation, you bet you're going to feel it the worst in that knee. Right. But you're also going to have that chronic stiffness. And here's the other problem is, it's become normal that, or at least in people's thoughts, they think it's normal. It may be common, but it's definitely not normal. I can assure you that. But most people are in this state of chronic inflammation, and therefore they think the pain is just, I'm getting old. That's not true. I'm 53, and I have less pain and aches today as I did in my 30s. I can assure you that. I was sick in my 30s, but how did I get well? My cellular detox, that's what I teach. You have to remove the number one causes of chronic inflammation if you're going to remove the pain.
How common is mold?
It's more common you would think. And the reason why is because of the way we're building buildings. Think about it. In the old days, we weren't worried about efficiency. Buildings had a lot of airflow. It cost you a lot more in your heating bill. But the airflow was critical, actually, because it moved fresh air in and out. Today, we're building buildings very tight, which is a problem. It actually can be a problem because it locks in humidity. So humidity over 50 is enough to start feeding a mold problem. Now, you add a leaky basement. If there's water, there's mold because it's in the air. So what we call that is amplified mold. So once it starts to take off, and that can happen in between walls. So let me give you a few examples. So your basement leaks, right? Because there's positive water pressure on one wall. And it just does it periodically. People will say, well, it does it every once in a while when it storms. There's mold there. Whether you see it or not, there's mold there. If there's water, there's mold. You have to dry up a leak or something, whether it's a water exposure of any type, within 36 to 42 hours. Otherwise, mold starts forming. So that's why it's so prevalent. Oh, and there's another thing. We're building walls with what? Drywall, which has the perfect food for mold. All you have to do is add water. It's cellulose. It's the paper on the back of drywall. Cellulose is its favorite food. So imagine, add water, the spores are there. You wonder why we have a problem. And again, buildings aren't breathing, so we're holding in the humidity, which again, above 50% humidity, it will feed the mold.
How can someone figure out if they have mold?
That's a great question because it's very tough. If you do an air sample, you're testing for mold spores, and that can be very deceiving. Remember, what makes people sick with biotoxic illness, or just call it mold illness, is it's not the spore, it's the biotoxin that the mold produces. So for example, molds will produce a toxin to protect itself from other molds and bacteria, but that toxin is what makes humans sick. So there's, not every mold is extremely dangerous, but most people have heard of black mold, Stachybotrys, there's Aspergillus. So there's a group of molds that we know make people very sick. And genetically, some people are more susceptible. I would argue that mold is bad for everybody, but the level of exposure and the genetic susceptibilities, and there's one more, your other exposures. So if you're someone who has a mouthful of silver fillings, you have other neurotoxic exposures, what's going to happen is your bucket's filled and now you get in a mold exposure. All of a sudden your ceiling leaks and you don't know it, it's in the attic. These biotoxins that the mold produces are now being sucked into your heating and air conditioning, your HVAC system, and you're being exposed to them. And now the bucket overflows. And now you have unexplainable illness. It starts with fatigue, then it goes to anxiety, then it's sleep, now it's pain. And now you're taking medications. That's not working. So you go and you're getting chiropractic visits, you're getting acupuncture, you're taking natural things. Some better, you're still sick. Meanwhile, you have mold in your attic, or maybe it's your basement, unknowingly. And you go, someone mentions it to you. You might have mold, you should check. So you go to your thing and you Google a mold guy, he comes in, he does an air sample. Oh, I checked that, it's okay. I'll tell you a better test, it's called an ERMI test. ERMI, the way it sounds, E-R-M-I. Google it. And you can find this test, you collect dust in the house, it's a better way to test. So it gives a much tighter parameter. So an ERMI test is much better. But I always say, test the people. So if you have a house of 4 people, and 2 all of a sudden have unexplainable illnesses, you might have mold. So there's a few tests that we can look at in people, but one of which is a simple online test called a visual contrast sensitivity test, vcstest.com. And it's a visual test. And if you fail that test, you might have mold. That's a good place to start.
So what's the relationship between mold and your visual acuity?
I was hoping you would ask. I said that mold
took the bait.
Mold produces a biotoxin. That's essentially a neurotoxin. And neurotoxins end up on your nerves. The one nerve we're able to test very easily is the optic nerve. So that's why vision is always affected with certain neurotoxins, because it's a big nerve, the optic nerve. So this test isn't looking at your acuity, meaning your ability to see well. It's looking at contrast. Mold, these biotoxins attach to the nerve and they cause lack of oxygen, hypoperfusion of the optic nerve. And it's happening in, matter of fact, most of the nerves in your body, and that's one of the reasons you have pain, by the way, and other neurological things, perhaps. But we're able to measure the lack of contrast, meaning you can't see this contrast. And by the way, another sign of that is you start having trouble seeing at night when it's raining. So that's contrast ability, not visual ability. But anyway, so you're able to measure that. And if you fail the test, you have hypoperfusion of the optic nerve, meaning lack of oxygen, which creates the inability to see contrast.
So let's string together next steps. So basically what's laid out is that there are these varying environmental things, toxins, that can cause vague symptoms, including pain of somewhat unexplained origin. And maybe he's getting diagnosed as one of these vague diagnoses of some type of an autoimmune or some type of a fibromyalgia, et cetera. Say, that's just what you've got, because nobody can quite pinpoint it, which sounds like this would be sort of vague and maybe create these misdiagnoses.
It does.
And now you start to test and say, oh, okay, we've got something in the jaw, that's there, that's saying, hey, that one of those gaps is there and it's infected, or we've got mold. Now, in the jaw, you already said you got to find a dentist that would specialize in being able to go in there and remove that infection.
Yeah.
So what kind of dentist is that?
Yeah, it's very important. Most regular dentists, they've heard about these things, but they don't have a process in their office to deal with it correctly. And again, we've learned a lot over the years. You have to go in and clean the infection. That sounds pretty easy and reasonable, and I think most dentists can do that. Now, today it's being done a little better. They go in with lasers now, which produce ozone water, and ozone has a really good penetrating effect deeper into some of these cavities that it's very difficult to get rid of the infection. So that's a new procedure that's being done. Ozone gas can also be used in that process for the same reason. But also,
Is this because most of these bugs are anaerobes? In other
they
words,
are.
They die in the presence of
anaerobic,
oxygen.
so that's
Okay.
right. So ozone works very well, and they're very difficult to kill. And so oftentimes they can relocate, which is another conversation we should have. So using these proper procedures is very important. Now, there's something else that's very important, and that's what happens after. So oftentimes a year, 2, 3 later, people end up with another cavitation because their immune system's low. Now today, there's something called PRF. Many people watching this maybe heard of PRP, which is used for pain. Someone probably will talk about it in these interviews. But PRF is basically plasma-rich fibrin. And they put it in there, and it activates healing. So it has some of your own stem cells in it. And then they sew it over. So they clean it out, and then they put the PRF into the cavity, and then they sew it shut. Now, we have learned, or dentists have learned, that the reinfection drops dramatically with the PRF. So these are some of the things that are now being done. So number one, you have to detect it. Cone beam is the way to do that now, right? Number two is it has to be done properly so we don't get reinfected.
What about mold? So now you're saying get tested for mold, you find you have mold. Is the conventional treatment of mold typically the right one, or do you see it a different way?
Yeah, well, look, you have to find someone who, and I'll just throw some ideas out there just so you know that, okay, that's the right way to do it. So many people come in and they have this person come in and they start cleaning up mold. You have to set up a containment because otherwise when you touch that mold, you will send these biotoxins over every square inch of your home. And once you're sensitized to this, you become very ill with even small amounts of these biotoxins. So it's kind of like, a little bit of the hair of the dog that bit you in the sense of a negative way, meaning that you get a whiff of that same strain and you're sick again. We call it sicker quicker. But the bottom line is they have to build a containment so that you don't expose the house at a much higher level. How they do that is you set up a negative air pressure. So they basically plastic it all around and then they pull the air out. So it has to be done right. And then you have to be careful because a lot of the chemicals that they use, people are very chemically sensitive that are very sensitive to mold. They become very chemically sensitive, and that can make the people in the home sick. So you want to use a more natural solution. So again, I've interviewed experts in this area, in my podcast and on my website. It's very important that you educate yourself on the proper removal. And then we back up to the body.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a system there that works. We have to upregulate cell function detox, as I said. But then a binder in the gut has to be used. And we use a product called Bind, but there's a medication called cholestyramine that's been used for years too. These things don't leave the gut, and the mold gets brought to the liver, and it binds to something called bile. Bile is dumped in the gut for digestion, but it carries these biotoxins with it. So the process is upregulate cell function and grab this toxin away from the bile complex and pull it out of the body. And again, I don't expect people to understand that, but just know this. There's a proper way to do it. In grabbing the toxin, the biotoxin, away from the biocomplex is the standard protocol for how you get rid of this biotoxins from mold.
Is the heavy metal process about the same as far as the detox?
So with heavy metals, we use that same system, upregulate cell function, a binder in the gut to pull it all the way out of the body. But with heavy metals, we use other binders at the cell that have an ability to grab onto these toxins. Some people might be familiar with is DMSA, DMPS, but they have to be used correctly. So I've written some articles about this because people take them just once a day. They have to be taken frequently so they stay up in your blood so you don't get redistribution. There's another one, Cytodetox, it has to be taken 3 times a day. But these are real binders that have the ability to grab onto these heavy metals and make sure they go all the way out of the body. Things that are typically used in the alternative circle, things like Corella, Cilantro, they're weaker binders. And the danger there is you just create a lot of redistribution. It's kind of like the street cleaners going down the street. It's amazing. I always say that, I didn't see those things for years. Now I see them again. But you see this big plume of dust around them, right?
Right.
And you wonder, this is what my tax dollars are doing? They're paying for this?
Just redistributing the dust.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You see this thing, you see it laying on the cars afterwards. That's what a lot of these weak binders do. They just kind of redistribute the toxins. You have to use real binders, but you have to use them correctly, meaning you have to take them frequently enough. And all detox is cycled. Whether it's 3 days on, 4 off, 7 on, 7 off, 4 on, 10 off. There's cycles because that's the way real detox works. So heavy metals, biotoxins, hidden infections, very similar process of upregulating cell function, using binders to make sure it goes all the way out of the body. But most people do it wrong. Even most alternative doctors are using these weak binders or they're using real binders incorrectly. There's a lot of pitfalls when it comes to detox. Number one, they don't look for the sources and remove them. You're trying to detox someone when they still have silver fillings. It's the sources going in. You're trying to detox someone when they're living in a moldy home. The sources are still going in or that have cavitation. I see many people that went to the best and the best in our space, and yet I find out that they're in a moldy home or they have a deep cavitation. The magic is finding these hidden causes. I mean, it seems so logical, but yet they've went to the best and they didn't even ask them about their home. They went to the best and they didn't even ask them if they had wisdom teeth out or a root canal that holds infections, and we know they cause chronic illness and chronic pain. It's remarkable to me, but that's why I'm teaching doctors.
So would a traditional medical approach be like, say, oh, you got an infection and a cavitation in your jaw, or you have mold? Are they going to prescribe antibiotics instead of doing some of the other things you're talking about?
Well, when you go to your standard doctor, they think of mold as either an allergy or, well, we'll do some basic tests. We don't see any mold in your lungs or your blood. You're okay. Biotoxic illness, we're not looking for mold spores. We're looking for a biotoxin. So different tests, one called a C4A test, is more accurate as far as assessing whether you have a mold exposure. And again, I mentioned the visual contrast test, and there's some other tests that most doctors aren't going to run. So typically it's missed in both sides of the world, alternative and allopathic.
Any final thoughts for people who are saying, some of this seems like it applies to me or somebody I know, and I want to take a next step? What final thoughts might you have for them?
Typically if you have chronic pain, there's a reason. Typically it's neurotoxic. And again, I'm identifying these 3 that are typically missed. You have to look there. Find a practitioner who knows how to look there, what tests to run, and more importantly, what to do about it after. I briefly described a system that we know works. Because even if you end up being properly diagnosed with one of these things that we're talking about, the greater mistakes happen on the back end is how do we get rid of it? So there's a lot of pitfalls here. In the jaw, it can be done wrong. Mold, it can be done wrong. Heavy metals, it's often done wrong. So again, you have to find the source, get rid of it. Once you find the source, then you have to get rid of it out of your body correctly.
Well, very enlightening. Definitely a subject that I don't hear many people talking about when it comes to pain. So I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
I think you'd agree. Dr. Pompa is very knowledgeable and has some unique perspectives. And the idea that people who are experiencing chronic pain and don't understand where it's coming from, that he might have identified some of those sources. So I really enjoyed this interview, and I hope you did too. We have some conversations coming up with some patients and also a look at some procedures. Disclaimer, these procedures can be a little bit disturbing or upsetting if you're not used to seeing things like needles being stuck into people, etc. If you're someone who's squeamish, you might want to miss that part. But I would look at the patient interviews either way because they're very revealing.
So this is what we call Honey Matrix. It's something that we make here at our office to help our regenerative treatments. You know, we can add exosomes to this. We can add bone marrow, PRP, and it's made from the patient's own blood, and it's got a rich source of cytokines, which are very healing and, in essence, anti-inflammatory. We also have something called fibrin. If you can see this painting over here, you know, these spaghetti-like material, that's actually fibrin. This is a painting of a blood clot. So these are platelets, these are red blood cells, and then this is fibrin. So Honey Matrix is in essence a very, very rich fibrin matrix. So when this is injected into like a rotator cuff or a knee joint or a tendon or a lumbar spine, it will automatically form a very tight weave that will hold a scaffolding space so that the material will stay in the same spot, but it'll also hold a lattice or a scaffolding for new tissue to repair itself. Awesome stuff. Yeah, Dave, that's pretty significant. It's what we call a loss of the starry night pattern. Let's see if we get a better shot of that.
That's on the right side too.
Yeah, well, it's probably going to be on both sides. So these really dark areas here, so this is his multifidus muscle. These are the core muscles that will support the integrity of his back. And it's not uncommon for us to see problems with these muscles from disuse. So people that have chronic pain, they're going to lose a lot of the dense muscle fibers. So you have a loss of starry night pattern in these areas, which is what's called fatty infiltration. So basically this is fat that's moved in, and he's lost the muscle. So the muscle's not going to be as strong, and it's not going to be as supportive. And there's been some studies out of Europe that show that if we're able to inject these areas with, well, we use Honey Matrix that we feel is actually a bit of a step up from just regular what's called platelet poor plasma, that these muscles can actually regenerate and repair themselves. So in addition to injecting areas around the disc and the facets, nerve roots, and different supportive ligaments in the spine, we like to target these areas because when we see these types of conditions, very often they're pain producing. And besides being pain producing, they're also going to affect his structural stability of the spine. Can you guys see those? See this here? You see that, Dave?
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a look at the other side. We'll print that. That's Marcella's. Yeah, look how much worse it is on this side, which is his bad. I mean, this is terrible.
Right.
I mean, you can see the difference, right? Here versus here.
So
That's
the
like
the light stuff is good.
So it's not air, it's not fluid, it's fat. It's like, you know, like Kobe beef? You ever eat Kobe beef?
Probably not the real stuff, but more marble beef for sure.
Right. And how do they make Kobe beef?
They fatten the cows up.
Yeah, they stick them in a pen and they don't let them exercise. So that's what's happening here,
Great.
is because you're probably on the computer quite a bit,
Yes.
you sit quite a bit,
Yes.
you know, this isn't getting activated. So we're going to fix that.
That's a total trip.
A little numbing solution. Now we're going to get started.
anything that travels, baby pillows, alright?
So good.
These can be a little tender. New breaker, and then you tell me, man.
Yeah, and any time you want to use some gas, David, we have, nitrous oxide over here that you can breathe. So we don't want you to be suffering at all, okay?
Alright.
You sure?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I do a lot of dry needling these days, so it's toughened me up, prepared me for this.
Get this out of the way.
Is that moving? Is that local?
Oh no, just
Local?
yeah.
Travel?
No, no.
Is that where you feel it?
Yes. I would say that you are nailing the spot. It's just like it's just a dull feeling. It doesn't actually remove.
Iliolumbar.
So good. Feels so good.
These areas that he's injecting are the iliolumbar ligament. These are like struts from around L2, L3, L4, L5, and S1. So basically where the pelvis meets the lumbar spine, there's these very thick ligaments. They're these bands. And they get very damaged from sitting, long periods of time, from activities, running, playing sports. And so connective tissue is really unique in the sense that it's really dense. And so it doesn't have the blood supply that some other tissues that we, like your gums. You cut your gums and your gums will heal very rapidly, right? And we know like things that are closer to our heart heal quicker. So it also has to do with the density of the tissue. When the tissue is denser, the body has a hard time repairing it because blood can't perfuse it, like cartilage and connective tissue are the most common. So these are very typical connective tissue bands that give a lot of support to the lower back. And we found that 9 out of 10 patients that present to us with quote-unquote a diagnosis of a disc injury actually have a iliolumbar ligament problem. And even though the disc might be producing pain, which is actually fairly rare, we found that it's usually being produced by other tissues, that the treatment of the iliolumbar ligament will give a lot of support to the disc, because the disc is going to be unstable if it doesn't have good strut system. And like I said before, we've got both the honey matrix and the exosomes combined in this injection. So once they're injected into that iliolumbar ligament around the spine, they're going to stay right there. And the exosomes have an ability to just really suck and draw all of the existing stem cells in his body to go and migrate to that area and produce new tissue, whether it's nerve, muscle, tendon, ligament, disc material. All that can happen with these treatments. Wow, look at that spot there. You want to come from this way to come so you get a little bit longer access on that. So we're going to be injecting these multifidus muscles with the honey matrix.
So I think
Get some superficial and some deep. What's up?
You gotta get a bigger needle.
Yeah, we're just longer. Yeah, you're in it. Let me turn this way so it makes a little bit more sense. Yeah, you're in it. So a little bit more superficial. Yeah, there's, see the tip of the needle here, kind of coming into that fatty area. Beautiful, right there. Yeah, perfect. And then just advance it a little bit further, right into here. There you go. Nice. Beautiful. Not too bad.
No. Hang in there.
Almost done. Sorry.
It's okay.
You see the needle coming down into this area. That's a good spot there. A little deeper. There you go. Maybe kind of bring it into here. Beautiful, right there. Oh yeah. You just see it. Oh, and see the air. There's just a little teeny air in the syringe at the end. So we definitely got the right spot. Good deal, David. You did great. So we're gonna do some laser on you. So we're gonna laser this area, and then we're gonna put you in a whole body cryotherapy chamber.
Oh, sick.
Have you been in one of those before?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we use that so that you'll heal a lot quicker, and it's also good for pain reduction. All right?
Cool.
All right.
So, David, thanks for sitting down and having this conversation.
Thank you for having me here.
So, what motivated you to want to get this work done?
Oh man, well, I've had this really nagging back injury since about September of last year, and I have done almost everything I can think of minus this for it, and have made some progress, but I continually re-aggravate it and cause more problems. And now it's the point where like I'm a head case about it, and I'm just like trying to eradicate it for good so I can be 100% again.
What's the nature of the injury? Did you get any diagnosis around it?
I got an MRI and they said it was unremarkable. They said there's a herniation, but it's not a herniated disc. It's like, so it's like a muscle herniation or something. So basically what happened is I was playing ultimate frisbee, which in terms of running and stuff, I would say is similar to soccer. And I fell and something got knocked out of place and I could feel, but it wasn't painful yet. And then I played again a week later and like severely strained my QL muscle, I think, and could be my abdominal stuff too, to the point where like I couldn't bend over and like getting out of bed was awful. It was just like excruciating pain. And for months it was just not really getting better, and it's really slow. And I am actually 30 years old, believe it or not 16, and I was very surprised that it's taken so long for it to heal. And even now, I did some running this morning, and I can still feel it. And my biggest fear is that it just isn't going to go away, even though I've been doing physical therapy, strength training, everything for it, and it's just still there, you know.
And does it feel like a burning or a stabbing pain? What's like?
I would
how do you
describe
experience it?
I describe it currently as dull and achy. At its worst, it's definitely burning and not burning. Sorry, it's more like stabby. When I injure it, it's like something snaps.
Right.
And which is I think the straining moment basically. And then after that, it's like messed up real bad for a couple weeks. Where like just the transition from sitting to standing is where I notice it the most. Where I have to like be very careful because it feels awful.
And the diagnoses are basically unremarkable. Yeah, it's like maybe you
back
strained a
hurts.
muscle or something.
Yeah.
But no real definition to what might really be going on.
Yeah, I mean, like the closest I could say is maybe it was a QL strain, but I mean, it feels like a lot more than that. You know?
And strains, muscle strains will typically 4 to 6 weeks.
Exactly. Yeah. So doing this for 8 months, I'm like, am I that? Like, what's wrong? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's no way.
And so Now you've gone through all this. I'm hearing, and maybe just tell me if I'm right in my perception, though. But psychologically, this is a little unnerving. Saying I've got a chronic thing going on here. I'm only 30 years old. I shouldn't have this problem. You look like a fit guy that's pretty active.
Yeah, this actually gave me kind of I wouldn't say midlife because I hope to last past 60, but like I woke up and I was like, all right, I'm gonna hire a strength coach, and I've been doing that 4 days a week since then, which I'm in much better shape now, but even when I play, like I've been able to play a little bit recently. I haven't really been able to play my sport for essentially 8 months, but it's in the back of my head, so I'm not going as hard as I could. And what I have is recently, as a month and a half ago, I re-aggravated it a bit, and so it's like it's psyching me out a lot. And I sometimes I'm mentally tough, but with stuff like this, I'm definitely not, and it's messing with my quality of life in a big way for sure.
Wow. So what procedures did you have done today?
I had exostomes, I think, injected into my back.
Yeah.
There felt like there was a lot of injections. I'm not really sure. I was mostly numb. And I forget exactly. He said something about fatty acid or fatty infiltration. Basically, he was saying that my multifidus.
He saw it in the muscle.
Yeah, he said my multifidus is real messed up, which is I love hearing stuff like that because then I'm like, oh, there's something to fix.
Yeah,
which makes me happy. I was nervous he was going to be like, oh, it's fine. There's nothing wrong here. So he said that essentially my multifidus is not functioning properly, and so fat has gotten in there, and so now we need to get that muscle alive again and rebuilt because that's going to lead to significant other problems. And I sit all the time, so I'm sitting probably 8 hours a day, which is gross.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's not helping.
Right. I'm going to recommend a stand-up desk for you.
I have one and I never use it.
The key is to have both. So you get up sometimes, sit down sometimes.
Yeah.
So, and I think you had the honey matrix done too.
Yes.
So, and that's another kind of, I'll call it a concoction. I'll talk to the doctors more about that so they can describe it in detail. But I peeked my head in a little bit while you were getting your injections done. So I saw they had an ultrasound there.
Yes.
And actually, in the multifidus, they could see the fat infiltration in there on the ultrasound, I think is what they were looking at. And they also did that for needle placement.
Yes.
So now, because a lot of people probably are wondering, so how was it? Did it hurt a lot, a little? What did it feel like?
It was fine. Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of dry needling, and I would say that was more intense than this. The only moments during this treatment where I was a little bit discomforted is when, I have no idea how deep these needles were going, but it certainly felt like there was 1 or 2 times where he was hitting a bone. But even that was just kind of a dull feeling.
Yeah.
I'm a little sore right now, but not significantly. I'm not gonna sprint around here right now, and I was told not to do that.
Yeah. You just had this done 30 minutes ago, right? Or so
more, maybe 15 minutes. Yeah. It really wasn't bad, honestly. With this sort of treatment, I feel like the lidocaine shot is probably the most uncomfortable thing.
Right.
And then after that, it's just a dull. I can't even feel the needle go in, really. Wow. So I'm guessing they injected me 10 times or something, but I really have no idea.
Yeah, they did.
I feel like it was harder for everyone watching than it was for me.
That's good to know. I definitely was watching. I'm like, oh, that's a lot of needles going in a lot of places, and and I think psychologically, especially people who maybe are a little bit needle phobic, like I am. I don't like the idea of needles coming into me so much. I don't have problems with IVs and that kind of stuff, but but these are long needles. But at the same time, I was wondering what the experience would be on your side, and it was no big deal at all.
Yeah, it might have been different if I was watching them do it or something. But even then, just the feeling itself wasn't bad at all.
Yeah.
I did an ozone treatment 6 months or so ago, and that was infinitely worse.
Wow. Okay.
Because they were injecting I just felt like they were inflating balloons in my back. And even that one, though, the lidocaine shot was the worst part. And that's nothing.
Once they numb the skin, then it's pretty easy once it goes in.
Yeah. For anybody who would be concerned with needles, this was very easy. It was really fine.
How much did you know about stem cell therapy or exosomes before you got here?
Not a ton. I know it is kind of on the cutting edge, and I work in a health company, and I was just at an event recently where I was seeing what the future is holding for essentially the medical field, and so it's something where I was given the opportunity to participate in this, and I just wanted to see what it's like. And I had something to work on that I really needed help, I've heard it essentially everything from it didn't really work to a miracle cure for a lot of people, and it's more on the miracle cure side from what I've what I've seen. So yeah, I'm open to all the new things, and I wanted to see. I mean, I've been hearing about it forever because of like the legal stuff around stem cells and all that. So it's just cool to get to participate and see, and again, hopefully get the massive benefits that I know that it can potentially give.
Obviously, we don't know what the results are going to be yet. You just had it done 15 minutes ago, but is your hope that this is going to basically resolve this problem where you forgot you ever had it?
Yeah. I mean, that's what it's been described to me as from other people who have had similar treatments, is like they forgot that they ever had the injury, and I would love that experience. That would just be so great. So yeah, I'm hoping that this will clean up my fatty infiltration in my back, and I'm probably going to still sit a lot, so I need to fix that too. But at least I can get caught up a bit. That'll be nice.
And isn't that sometimes the blessings in injuries, is that it causes you to make lifestyle changes, kind of like the wake-up call, right? Because I'm hearing things you're going to change and have changed as a result.
Yeah, I hired a strength coach. I hired a personal assistant to start cooking for me. I started going to physical therapy regularly. And so I did dry needling and body work, and I've been on like a rampage for that. So like currently, aside from this injury, I'm in the best shape of my life, easily. And if I was 100%, I'd be like far and away the best shape of my life. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse, I guess. Like, it sucks to be injured, and it sucks to not have been able to play my sport for a while, but like ultimately, I'm very happy with the results. Even before this is going to give me some extra arms and all that sort of thing. I'm stoked for the future now. For sure.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you for allowing us to actually film your procedure, and for you sitting here and talking about it with us.
Yeah, happy to do it. Anytime you guys want me to come in for stem cells, I'll be there.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, thanks so much for sharing your story with us.
It's a pleasure.
So, what's your background? What do you do?
My background is in psychology. I have a doctorate in psychology, and so I'm very interested in health issues that go with that, because I find if you're working on your body, your brain's doing a lot better as well.
True enough. And you had certain challenges that you were pursuing some treatment for. What were they?
I did. I have two specific ones, and they were very old and chronic. Mm-hmm. The first time, about 25 years ago, I got a lung infection when I was in the Andes in South America, and I never recovered from it fully. The inversions here made it very difficult in wintertime. And Reagan had suggested trying the stem cells in my lungs, and it made a huge difference. I had it a few years ago. So during this time of year, I don't feel any symptoms in my lungs whatsoever, even with the bad air that comes in here in January.
Wow. And we say here, you talk about Salt Lake City.
Salt Lake City.
Yeah. And that was like fairly immediate, or how long did it take before you started noticing the differences in your lung function?
About 2 or 3 months.
2 or 3 months. And still to this date, no problems?
No problems.
Wow. And what else did you do?
Well, about 30 years ago, I hurt my neck in high school sports, and I literally broke it, but I didn't know it at the time. And so I've been living with this pain for decades. About 6 years ago, I had about 2/3 of my neck fused to try to deal with the pain, and it didn't do anything. It may have stabilized things with the screws they put in, but...
So you went through this whole surgery, and at the end of it, you had no pain relief?
Zero.
Wow. Wow, that'd be kind of discouraging. So
was.
Psychologically, since that's your background, what was the impact of that?
Well, I think when you have a chronic health issue, it's with you every day. It's always working on you if you know it or not. And I think it creates just a little bit of grief and loss in your system with having that constant pain with you. Even when you go to sleep, I think it's there.
Yeah. So what did you do? What was the next step after your surgery?
Well, Reagan eventually suggested I try stem cells in my neck. Even though my neck was fused, it wouldn't go into the bone, but the muscles around the neck have been chronically in a spasm for decades. And so he put the stem cells on both sides of my neck. And it took about 3 months, but then I did feel a very noticeable difference in the pain. My neck muscles relaxed, because apparently there was some nerve damage, but having released the tissues, everything just felt stronger, the tissues were softer, and that actually took away more of my headaches than anything.
Oh, you're getting headaches too as a part of that?
As part of that.
How long ago was that treatment?
About 3 years ago.
And 3 years later, you're still noticing that the benefit is there?
Absolutely.
Wow. So was there anything else you did in addition to the stem cells? Were they doing acupuncture, nutrition, or anything else, or was it just pretty much straightforward stem cell therapy?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I've been a patient of Reagan's for 15 years, so I really trust him. When he makes a recommendation, I always listen, and I end up doing 100% of it eventually. So for him to bring up stem cells with me, I thought I was going to listen. I thought might as well go through with it and see what the results would be.
Right. So you were getting these other therapies already, so this was the one thing that was added. And
Correct.
yeah, any other changes in your life that you noticed once you started doing this? Obviously the neck pain went away. You can do more activities of daily living, I imagine, as a consequence of that. Is there any other health benefits that you might have perceived as a result?
Well, especially with my lungs. I like to be outside like most people do in Utah. I was not winded anymore. I used to exercise a lot. I still exercise even with the bad lungs, but I noticed I wasn't more tired afterwards because my lungs had been damaged.
Right.
I feel like a normal human being. I felt I was just properly fatigued, and then I felt great the next day.
Well, I've got a great question for you because of your professional background. As we're talking to other patients, throughout the country who have been going through different therapies trying to solve their pain issues, sometimes the question comes up where people say, well, maybe it's just a placebo, or how much of this is in their head. What's your point of view on that? Because this is an area that you would understand.
Well, I can't speak for other people, but I did not think this was a placebo because I'm pretty scientific, even on the mental health side, but also when it comes to my neck, I don't think a placebo would work. I've tried so many things. In fact, I initially had some resistance in doing the stem cells because I have tried everything that I could think of. Nothing worked. So I was a little fatigued at trying something new and having it not work. And so when it worked, I knew it was not a placebo effect.
Well, what's interesting is, you mentioned surgery. What other types of things did you do before the surgery to try to solve the problem?
I had done different rounds of physical therapy. I did a long time of chiropractic care. In fact, a chiropractor referred me to Reagan years ago because he thought he couldn't help me as much for the pain issues I was having, and Reagan is the person that started me on my journey to start feeling a lot better.
Right. Wow. So you were definitely committed, it sounds like, to getting this figured out. And I guess motivated, obviously, if you're living with it every day.
Yes.
Yeah. So in your own practice, when you're working with patients, are some of them people that are dealing with chronic pain that you're trying to, help them psychologically deal with the problems, or is it really a different type of practice that you have?
Oh no, I think in a lot of ways the body keeps the score of how we're doing mentally. And so probably 2/3 of my own patients are probably experiencing some sort of physical health. And so I refer people to Reagan for acupuncture, and then when someone is looking at doing stem cell, I tell them it helped me a lot.
Yeah, so it's interesting because if that's the case as you describe it, then having sort of these alternative solutions. Because I imagine a lot of these people are taking medications. And maybe were you taking medications also prior to this?
A lot of medications. I was taking a lot of Excedrin and ibuprofen throughout the day. Every once in a while, I'd have a prescribed painkiller.
Yeah. And did you have concerns about what that might be doing to your body also?
Of course, especially what those medications do. They put a lot of stress on your liver and kidneys, and there's other ramifications probably in the brain, but I would rather be out of pain, at least at that moment.
Yeah, I understand that. It's interesting, because I share a story. Why I'm a chiropractor is a high school wrestling injury, to my neck that, got me on that path. So I sort of
So
get
you
that.
get it.
Yeah, I do. Well, really fascinating. Any other things that you think you'd like to share relative to your own personal experience?
I would. As a professional, it's helpful to have Reagan available for all sorts of health issues, if it's acupuncture or stem cells, because when I refer someone to him, it's also my own professional reputation online.
Right.
The good news is it always goes well with Reagan, and then my patients are happy. With myself, it's done. I just can't speak enough for the treatment I've received in here through, I mentioned acupuncture and stem cell, but the herbs Reagan prescribes are always dead on. I always feel an immediate effect from any herbs he adds to any sort of pain management or other health issue I may be having at the time.
How tough was it, if it was tough at all, to wrap your head around this sort of different mode of care? Because none of this is traditional medical, Western medical treatment, at least, and you with your academic background probably were brought up in that frame of reference. So was it difficult for you to try to get your head wrapped around things like acupuncture and herbs and other such things?
Not at all. For whatever reason, I like to keep an open mind with things. Plus, one of the founders of our field talked about a statement. He said, God is in the diseases. So in some ways, the diseases are teaching us things we need to learn, but we're not meant to suffer in them.
Right.
They're just to teach us things.
Well, quite a bit of wisdom there. So thank you very much for sharing your story with us, and for the work that you are doing in helping people, and hopefully you'll help a lot of other people out there.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
John, thanks for coming to share your story. So tell me, what's your background?
So right now I'm a co-founder of a real estate fund, and we do projects all around the country. In large multifamily and commercial office buildings, and some senior assisted living facilities. And I've graduated in 1988 from the University of Utah in economics, and just been an entrepreneur all my life, and just came into this real estate venture about the year 2003, and started a first fund with my partner Paul, and we've grown it and added a lot more partners to it, and it's been a great success. Yeah.
Terrific. You seem like an active guy. Do you get out and do sports, or what do you do?
Yeah, I used to be a lot more active than I am. I'm a little older now, but the joint pain, and that's why we're here talking about this today. But yeah, I do weightlifting and running and swimming and such like that, but not nearly as active as I was when I was younger, for sure. Yeah.
So what kind of challenges were you having?
So my story about the platelet-rich plasma and the stem cells is, I'd read, for a lot of years about these, magical cells that could attach and repair, right? And I've grown up with, if there's bone on bone, cartilage is gone, you're done, you got to go to surgery.
Right.
And then I watched, some of these, NBA players and these professional athletes heal up so fast, and I was reading about this, and then I got a shoulder injury. I don't know really how I got it. I damaged this shoulder, and I couldn't do a push-up. It was very painful, and I couldn't even sleep some nights. And then I heard about and read about PRP, platelet-rich plasma. And I didn't want to do surgery. And I waited for it for about 5 months, and it would not heal. That shoulder I couldn't do a push-up. So I went to my doctor, and he said, have you ever considered PRP? And I didn't even know what that was.
Right.
Platelet-rich plasma. And he says, look, what we're going to do is we're going to take some blood from your arm, 6 vials. We're going to spin it on the little machine, come back in, and we're going to put these platelets, your own platelets, down into your joint, and they're going to attach and heal. And so I had to do that. We had to do it 3 sessions. And he said it might take 5 sessions. And it was a 4-week process. He says, you're not going to feel anything for about 4 weeks, but the 5th week and the 6th week, you're going to have some improvement, and you might have to come back and do, 4 to 5 sessions. Well, I did that, and sure enough, 4 weeks went by, nothing changed. And the 5th week, I had some huge improvement, and 6th week, huge improvement. So I went back again, same thing. Take the blood out of your arm, spin it on a little machine, the platelets, boom, 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 in your shoulder, into the joint, and 4 weeks later, 5th, I get some improvement.
Right.
And then I did the 3rd time, and sure enough, that last 5%, I'm back 100%, lifting weights, doing push-ups, fantastic, right? And this is something that happened, I just thought I would just let it heal.
Right.
But 5 months, I was still in pain. I knew there was something really wrong, and I wanted to do anything other than surgery.
Right.
People are telling me, avoid surgery, avoid surgery, avoid surgery. So that was a few years back. And then my father had back surgery about a year or so ago. And he has the same body type as me. And I've had some lower back in the same area, lower back problems for the same type of thing. But of course, my father's much older than I am. And he just had back surgery and had to put a lot of pins and a lot of things in that back. And so I went and had an x-ray of my lower back, and sure enough, there was some deterioration between 2 of the, now not a lot at my age, not a lot, but it was going in the wrong direction. And I had pain and waking up at night, and some nights in the morning trying to stretch out in the morning to keep the pain. And so I went back and started researching, wonder if PRP could help that. And while I was doing that, I saw something on stem cells. I knew PRP is kind of like the little brother of stem cells. And so researching that and reading that, I had realized by that time the cost of PRP had come way down. I'd read about it years ago. And I knew it was very expensive. And I knew that, like I said, professional athletes used stem cells to heal up. And so when I saw the cost, I thought, well, maybe I'll at least go check it out. I'd rather do that than surgery. And I went down, and it was, a very simple thing. They numb your back, and they take these little blank, I don't know, I guess they're called a catalyst in the medical world. They don't actually fix it. They just tell the other cells to fix it, right? And the way I understand it is, and of course I'm a layman, I don't have the medical knowledge to explain it right, but the way I understand it is that the stem cells are harvested from the umbilical cord of a baby that's just been C-sectioned. And so the mother has to have a huge, long background check Then these stem cells are harvested from that umbilical cord, and then they're frozen. And then when I walk into the office, they thaw those stem cells out into what's called a unit. And I believe there's millions of stem cells in that unit. And they inject those stem cells as close to the problem that I have. So the doctor came in and he injected those stem cells very, very close to the 2 discs that I had a problem with. And that was about 8 months ago.
Okay.
And it only took about 2 months, maybe a month, 2 months before I saw some improvement. Wow. And then 4 to 5 months after that, I forgot about that I ever had lower back pain. Now it comes back every once in a while, but nothing like it was. It was a daily thing for me, or every other day for a couple of years. And then having my dad having that back surgery before, it just brought that to the forefront of my mind. And so I'm a believer in it, and I tell people now, when I go out to dinner parties or I go to dinner people, I say, anyone that says they have a shoulder, a knee, or something, I always say, have you heard about stem cells? And most people have not. And I get excited about telling them about, listen, before you do surgery, you at least need to go and look into stem cells, because it's one of the most exciting things in the medical profession today that I know of. It's just incredible that it can attach to any damaged cell and replicate those cells, whether it's in a knee or a back or wherever. It's quite an amazing thing.
What were your expectations? Did you think you'd get the kind of results you did?
No, the results I think exceeded my expectations. Of course you walk into anything hoping for the best, but in reality, in physiology, you're aging, and you're eventually going to not be able to, you're going to go to the grave one day, right? So you're fighting a losing battle anyway. Your body is deteriorating, right? So having expectations of you being this super person after you have stem cells, of course, that in the back of your mind, the hope is way up there. Right. But no, I would say the stem cell procedure exceeded expectations in that after 3 or 4 months, like I said, after I forgot that I ever had back pain, I'd wake up and it was 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, and I'd go, I'm feeling great. Oh yeah, I remember I had the stem cells a few months back. That was a really a great epiphany moment for me, when it really kind of, my expectations went, wow, that really did do what it was supposed to do.
Well, are you pushing yourself right now? Are you like weightlifting and doing activities that you would normally do before you start having these pains?
Yeah. So like with my shoulder and with my back, the answer is yes. I'm back to 100% of what I could do before. Yeah. Before I got injured, before my shoulder, a couple years back, I went back to weightlifting and such, and then my back just kind of deteriorated over a little bit of time. But the answer is yes. I'm back to doing what I did before, and still backpacking and climbing and weightlifting and doing what golfing, whatever I did before. It's been really a great thing. Now, I know there's such thing as a placebo effect. And I know that sometimes people can get healed just by their mind thinking that they're healed, right? And this could be a placebo effect on me. I'm not saying it's not, because I have not gone back and had a follow-up x-ray to see physical proof if that deterioration in my back has reversed. I haven't done that. Right. And I probably will do that sometime in the future. Whether it's placebo effect or not a placebo effect, I'm happy with the result, right? So,
did you ever do a thought experiment to say, okay, if I hadn't have done this, what would my life be like right now?
No, not really. I just, you get into a mode where you're aging, and you just get to a point where you say, this is life, how it's going to be now. I used to could do X, and now you can't do X anymore. And this is life, right? But at the same time, you're always searching for that supplement, that procedure, that's something that can better your life, especially when you're in pain. And people that are in pain, I've just told them, like I said, my friends, that before you do surgery, you need to at least go take a look at this new technology and the benefits that it can bring to you.
Well, John, I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I wish that these results stick for you and continue for years into the future.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being here.
That's about as real as it gets. Real patients, real procedures. We wanted to show it all to you, so I hope you learned something important there. Well, that's it for episode 3. Wow. So much to know. Who knew there were so many new ideas in this realm of pain or finding solutions for pain. And I have to tell you, we're still at the beginning. There's a lot more coming. I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. Incidentally, I know it's like drinking from a fire hose sometimes. There's so much information here. So rest assured that if you want to own this information, you can. We certainly appreciate the people who invest in Pain Revealed that help support our mission and what we're trying to do in the world with this particular project. Also, it's not too late to share with people. If you know somebody you think will benefit from this information, we've got a long way to go. There's a lot more information coming, and we're really excited to bring it to you. So thank you for being here, and thank you also for sharing this vision with us.
I become friends with the pain. I know the pain is a companion. It's not gonna go away, and it's gonna come every time, no matter how much I train. So rather than already before being nervous and heart rate going up, and that's not good when you want to hold your breath, you want to keep the heart rate down and hold the metabolic rate down. And that's what I mean, leaning into it and accepting it.
We create miracles here every day. And there's a lot of skepticism when people come in here. When they see the change, when they see that pain response change in 5 to 7 minutes of clearing a muscle, it's like, wait a minute, what just happened? It can't be that fast, can it?
Stem cells produce a tremendous number of growth factors and exosomes that are cell-cell communicators. Cell-cell communication is absolutely perfect communication. They know exactly what they need to do, and they're telling the other cells exactly what to do, and they understand each other.
They injected the cord blood, and within 2 months I was completely done.
Wow.
No pain at all. And I can be on the ground with my grandkids chasing them around. So I wake up in the morning and it's wonderful. I don't have any pain waking me up going, oh my gosh.